She said, "Don't call me ma'am," and then smiled like she meant it. I didn't plan to be on that side of town. The app had glitched, shuffled the route, and suddenly I found myself driving past gates I'd never noticed, under trees that leaned like they were tired of standing straight. The houses here didn't look real. Ivy climbing the brick, doors painted in colors that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. I checked the name twice, thinking it might have been a mistake, but it wasn't. 4:15 p.m. Delivery Tanya 22, still, warm in the passenger seat. I pulled into the driveway, hands still sticky from holding coffee cups too long. My van made a soft creaking sound as I stepped out, like even it wasn't used to this kind of quiet. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened. She was standing there, barefoot, a silk robe tied just tight enough to be respectable but loose enough to feel like a story. Her hair was pulled back casually, a book still in her hand. She looked like she'd been waiting, not for food, but for a pause in the day. I greeted her the way I'd been trained, polite, detached. "Here's your order, ma'am." That was the first mistake. She tilted her head, barely. "Don't call me ma'am," she said. It wasn't harsh, it was almost teasing. Then, like punctuation, she smiled. A real one. Soft at the corners, like she smiled with her eyes before her lips ever caught up. I mumbled an apology, more out of habit than anything. She took the bag gently, fingers brushing mine. Accidental, I think. Or maybe not. The air felt heavier, suddenly the kind of heavy that doesn't press down but pulls you closer. "Long day?" she asked. I nodded, unsure how to answer. It felt like a question people asked when they already knew the answer. She leaned against the doorframe for a second, like she might say something else. But then she just nodded, almost to herself, and stepped back. The door didn't close quickly. It moved slow, like a curtain falling. And for a moment, before it shut entirely, I thought she looked back up at me. But I couldn't be sure. I got back in the van. The smell of warm food had faded. In its place was something else, vanilla maybe, or jasmine, or the memory of someone who wore it once. I looked at the house through the windshield for a few seconds longer than I should have. Told myself to move on. Told myself it was just another order. But the truth is, I didn't forget how she said, "It. Don't call me ma'am." Like it mattered. Like I mattered. It had been 5 days. I hadn't expected to see her again. Orders in that part of town were rare, and most of my route kept me in strip mall suburbs and business parks, places with blinking neon signs and tired cashiers. But there it was again, same address, same delivery window. My thumb hovered over the accept button a little longer than usual. I told myself it was just another shift, another tip, nothing more. But my heart knew better. I remembered the shape of her doorway, the way the vines curled around the arch like hands in prayer, the way she stood with one foot just behind the other, robe brushing against her ankle. She hadn't done anything overt. No wink, no lean, no unnecessary words. But something had stayed with me. The kind of presence you only notice in its absence. When I pulled into the driveway again, the porch light was already on. This time, she opened the door. Before I even knocked, no robe today. She wore a gray tank top and soft linen pants, barefoot again. Her toes were painted a color I didn't have a name for, something between wine and shadow. She held a sweating glass in one hand, ice clinking gently. I don't know why I noticed that detail. Maybe because everything about her felt like it came with a rhythm. "You again?" she said, like it wasn't a surprise, like it was something she'd decided before I arrived. I handed her the bag and tried not to look at her collarbone, which caught the light just enough to make me forget the rest of the world. She didn't rush. She took the food with one hand and stepped aside as if I might come in, but didn't say I should. "Do they always send you?" she asked. I wasn't sure if it was small talk or something heavier. I smiled, awkward, crooked, and shook my head. "Just luck, I guess." She raised an eyebrow like she didn't believe in luck, and for a few seconds, neither did I. Behind her, the house was warm with golden light. Not fancy. Lived in. A jazz record spun softly in the background, distant but deliberate. I could smell citrus and something floral. It made me dizzy in the best way. She looked at me a moment longer than she needed to, then nodded like we'd finished a conversation neither of us had started, and turned to go inside. The door didn't close all the way. I stood there, wondering if that was a mistake or an invitation. And when it finally clicked shut, I didn't move right away. Somehow, her bare feet had told me more than her smile did, and I wasn't sure why that mattered so much. But I knew I'd remember. I didn't check the app that morning hoping for her address. That would have meant something I wasn't ready to admit. Still, when the notification lit up my phone and her street name appeared, clean and unmistakable, I tapped accept before I could think. It was just delivery. That's what I told myself. But there was something about the way the numbers on her house came into view that made my chest feel tighter than it should, like I was walking toward a memory that hadn't happened yet. This time, she opened the door before I even stepped onto the porch. Like she'd heard me coming. Like she'd been waiting. She wore a soft black sweater that fell slightly off one shoulder and jeans that clung just enough to suggest she hadn't dressed for anyone, but hadn't not dressed for someone either. Her hair was loose today, not messy, just real. And she smiled. Not a full smile, but something tucked in the corner of her mouth, as if she'd just thought of something she wasn't sure she should say. "You again," she said, the same words as last time. But now they meant something different, like a thread had formed. Thin, but there. I nodded. "Guess they like to keep me in the neighborhood. Must be fate," she replied. But she didn't laugh. She just turned and walked inside, leaving the door open. I didn't cross the threshold. I stood there, holding the warm bag of food like a shield, staring at the entryway where candlelight flickered softly on the far wall. The house smelled of sandalwood this time, and citrus, always citrus. She came back holding a second glass, something amber in both, and stopped just a few feet from me. "Do you ever sit?" she asked. I blinked. "Sit? You're always standing. Just once you should sit." It wasn't a command, just a sentence she released into the air. She didn't. "Hand me the drink." She set it on the small table by the door and stepped back. I didn't take it, but I stayed a little longer than I needed to. Let the silence sit between us, like a third person neither of us minded having there. Finally, I handed her the bag. "Don't let it get cold," I said. She smiled again. That almost smile. I never do. And just like that, the door closed, again, softly. Not rushed. Not final. I stood on her porch after she was gone, looking at the untouched glass she'd left for me, still sweating, still full. I didn't drink it, but I didn't forget it either. The engine was running, but I didn't leave. I sat there outside her house, pretending to check my phone, pretending to scroll through nothing. Just noise to keep me from thinking too hard. But the truth is, I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. And that was more dangerous. It wasn't anything she did, not really. No touch, no suggestive look. Just a presence. Like she noticed things most people walked past. Like she'd looked right at me and didn't see just a delivery kid. She saw something else. I didn't know what. Maybe that's what made it a mystique. The glow from her porch light had a softness to it, like a stage waiting for another scene. Her silhouette was gone, but her presence lingered like the scent of her perfume. Barely there, but impossible to ignore. I tried to laugh it off. Told myself I was overthinking it. She was older, confident. She probably charmed everyone who came to the door. That glass she left for me, it was just a habit. Maybe she always set out too. Maybe she was being kind, like some people overtip not because of you, but because of who they used to be. Still, that moment where she stood in the doorway, her body angled toward me, her voice lower than last time, it didn't feel rehearsed, it felt personal. And that's what I didn't know how to file away. Because I didn't have space in my life for questions like that. I was working double shifts, skipping lunches, telling myself that love, connection, was for people who could afford the pause. But now, here I was. paused. In a quiet car, parked on a quiet street, hoping for something I wasn't brave enough to admit. I finally pulled away. Her house disappeared in the mirror, but not in my mind. I made 3 more deliveries that night. I couldn't remember any of their faces. I just remember the way her voice echoed without trying. The way the air in her doorway felt different, like entering a place where time slowed down. That night, as I lay in bed, I told myself it didn't mean anything. I didn't save her number. I didn't think about her robe from the first day. I didn't wonder what book she'd been reading, or what perfume she wore, or how her voice curved around the word again. But I didn't sleep easy, because forgetting something is different than pretending it never happened, and I was already pretending too much. It was the kind of evening that held its breath. Clouds hanging low, air thick with stillness. I had 2 deliveries left, and her address was second to last. I saw the street name and felt something in my chest shift. Not nerves, not hope. Just a quiet readiness, like I knew something was about to happen, and I couldn't stop it if I tried. When I reached her front step, the door opened before my knuckles even lifted. She was already there. Same house, same glow, but something different. The robe was gone. In its place, a dark tank top, loosely draped, bare shoulders catching the warmth of the hallway light behind her. Her hair was pinned up, just enough to feel deliberate. She held a glass in one hand, something with a lemon slice floating at the rim. "Twice in 1 week," she said, with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. I must be lucky. I stood there longer than I should have, the bag in my hand, suddenly feeling too small to matter. She stepped back, her voice soft. "It's just water, if that's what you're wondering. You can come in if you need a minute." I didn't, but I did. Inside, it smelled like orange peel, and something warm, cinnamon maybe. The kitchen light was dim, like a setting on a mood. And from the far corner, a small speaker whispered the low hum of jazz. No lyrics, just the steady murmur of brass and piano curling around the room like smoke. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she said, placing her glass on the counter. "But it's nice, having someone walk in." I placed the bag down, suddenly unsure if I should say something clever or just nod. I chose the nod. She leaned against the kitchen island, folding her arms, watching me. Not in a flirtatious way, in the way people look when they're deciding whether or not to trust you with a small truth. Then she asked, "Do you like music that doesn't talk?" I blinked. "What?" She gestured to the speaker. "Jazz. It says just enough and lets silence fill in the rest." I nodded again. Because that I understood. We didn't talk much, just stood there for a while listening. There was no invitation, no suggestion. But something unspoken passed between us. A rhythm. Like I'd stepped into a life already in motion and somehow didn't feel out of place. Her eyes stayed on the counter. Mine stayed on the light above the sink. But between us, stillness. Not awkward, just real. Like something that didn't need to be labeled to be felt. I didn't stay long, but I didn't rush either. When I reached the door, she said, "Next time you can come without the bag." And then she turned back to the kitchen, lifting her glass to her lips, letting the music carry me out. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Deliver, smile, leave. That was the rhythm. That was the safety of it. But something about her house broke. That pattern softened it like jazz through the walls. The next time I showed up, I didn't even check the order. I just knew the address. She answered in jeans this time, barefoot still, a soft sweater wrapped around her like a sigh. I offered the bag, but she didn't reach for it. She only stepped aside and said, "You know where the kitchen is." There was no need for permission anymore. The threshold had been crossed long before. Inside, the music was quieter than last time. More strings, less brass. Something played on vinyl. There was a glass of wine on the counter, not poured for me. Just there, like everything else in her world. Quiet, already waiting, not asking. She leaned against the fridge, watching me move as if this was a pattern we both understood now. And then she asked something simple, but it lingered. Do you ever feel invisible, even when people see you? I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how, but I didn't need to. She kept talking. I used to host dinners, she said, her voice almost caught in a memory. Long tables, loud friends too, much wine. Then my son moved out, the invitations stopped, and now it's just me and music and the occasional delivery boy who doesn't rush. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, not sure if I should smile or apologize. I like when the house has footsteps, she added, glancing at mine. There was no flirting in her voice, just absence, a deep one, like she was giving me her loneliness wrapped in casual words just to see if I'd flinch. And I didn't. Instead, I stepped to the counter and asked, "What are you listening to?" She named the artist, but I barely caught it. I was focused on how she spoke the name, like a secret she hadn't said out loud in years. She moved to the sink, poured a glass of water, and handed it to me. Our fingers touched, briefly. But there was warmth in it. Not heat, not spark, just warmth. The kind that asks nothing from you, only that you don't run away from it. I drank slowly, not for thirst. The kitchen held its silence. The wine stayed untouched. Her phone buzzed once on the table. She didn't check it. Then she looked up and said, "I don't usually do this." No context. No explanation. I didn't need one. Me neither, I replied. And that was true. It wasn't a moment where anything changed. Nothing happened. But something shifted. There, in the low light of a kitchen too quiet for strangers, I wasn't just the delivery guy anymore. I was something else. Not a guest. Not a lover. Just someone who stayed. And when I left that night, the wine glass still stood alone, but her voice echoed with something I hadn't heard before. Not invitation. Not loneliness. Something in between. That evening, the delivery bag was lighter, but my chest wasn't. I wasn't even sure what I was bringing anymore. Food, familiarity, maybe a little company neither of us was ready to name. She opened the door without a word this time, just stepped aside, then walked deeper into the house, trusting I'd follow. I did. She stood at the sliding glass door that led out to the porch, arms folded like she was holding in a thought. The air outside was that soft kind of cold, where it touches your skin just enough to remind you it's there, but not enough to send you back inside. "I sit out here sometimes," she murmured, "when the house feels too loud with nothing happening." There were no chairs, just a folded blanket and a low step we both eased down onto. She handed the blanket over without looking at me, half laughing. "Don't say I don't treat my guests right." We both knew I wasn't a guest. The city below blinked in small yellow lights, like a slow heartbeat. A breeze moved past us, rustling the edges of her hair, brushing her sweater gently against her frame. She didn't pull it tighter. She just let the air touch her. The blanket was thick, warm, unused for years maybe, but it smelled faintly of perfume and cedar. I laid it across my lap, but she sat close enough that the edge brushed her knee too. It wasn't intentional. Or maybe it was, but neither of us moved. The quiet held us, longer than any words could have. "I used to think silence was something you had to fill," she said finally. "Now I wonder if it's the only place anything real can happen." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't want to break it. That moment, that stillness, that soft permission to feel something without defining it. She looked at me, not directly, just enough for our eyes to almost meet. Her face was calm, not waiting, just letting the night do what it did. A plane passed overhead, its distant hum threading through the dark like a reminder that the world was still out there. But it felt far, small. She reached forward, tugging the blanket a little more her way. Now it was over both our knees. It could have been mistaken for cold, but the way her hand rested, just barely grazing mine beneath the fabric, said otherwise. She didn't squeeze. I didn't pull away. We sat like that for what could have been minutes, or longer. And in that unspoken space, with nothing but porch light, wind and the soft weight of fabric between us, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Wanted, without being needed. When she finally stood, the blanket slipped off both our laps. She didn't pick it up. She just turned toward the door and said, "You'll catch a cold." I followed, silently. But even after the door clicked shut behind us, I swear, I still felt the blanket. The next time I knocked, she didn't answer. Right away. I waited, unsure if I should leave the bag at the door or stay a minute longer. Then came the sound, not footsteps, but a sigh behind the door. Soft, tired, like someone deciding to be vulnerable just for a second. She opened it, in a slate blue cardigan and soft jeans, barefoot again. No wine, no jazz, no robe, just her. Real, quiet, and maybe a little unsure. "I didn't order anything," she said gently. "I know," I replied. "But the app said this address. Must have been a mistake." We both knew it wasn't. She stepped, aside anyway. There was something different about the house this time. The lights were dimmer, no music. The air felt heavier, like it had been holding something in. "I made tea," she said after a pause. "If you want." We sat across from each other on the floor of the living room. No counter, no barrier, just carpet, cushions, and cooling mugs of peppermint steam. She curled one leg beneath her and looked toward the window. "I used to wait for my ex to come home right there," she said. Watched headlights, counted seconds between the car door closing and the keys hitting the table. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She glanced at me, her lips parting like she was going to smile, but didn't. Just leaned back, resting her elbow on the cushion behind her. "My mom used to fall asleep at work," I said suddenly. "She'd wake up with print from the copier on her arm." That got a laugh out of her. A short one. But it stayed in her eyes. "Guess we're both products of tired women," she said. I nodded, then looked down. Our hands weren't close. Not at first, but as I reached for my tea, she reached for hers. And the back of her fingers brushed mine. She didn't flinch, and neither did I. I set the mug down. Let my hand rest on the cushion between us. She looked at it. Then, without a word, placed hers over mine. Just her fingers. Light. Barely there. Like a hush. And time slowed. The house. The ticking clock. The world outside. All of it softened. She didn't grip, didn't trace circles, just rested her hand like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there. Her thumb twitched once, not enough to say anything, just enough to mean everything. And in that stillness, where no music played and no one knocked, I realized something. This wasn't about her being older, or me being younger. It wasn't about timing or fantasy or forbidden thoughts. It was about loneliness, finally feeling less lonely. When she finally pulled her hand away, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a pause, a silent promise that touch didn't have to be loud to matter. She walked me to the door without speaking, and as I stepped outside, I felt the warmth of her hand still echoing through mine. I don't remember what we talked about that evening. Maybe it was the tea, or the stillness, or how our hands had met without a plan. But by the time I stood up to leave, something in the air had changed, like someone had turned the page in a book we weren't sure we were reading. She stood in the hallway, one shoulder leaning lightly against the wall, arms crossed the way. People do when they're trying to seem smaller than their feelings. The porch light behind her leaked in through the window, amber and soft, making her silhouette seem warmer, closer. I held the bag in my hand, the one I had no reason to deliver. She looked at it, then looked at me, and for a long second, nothing moved. I didn't want to go, but I also didn't know how to stay. She tilted her head, just a little, and the side of her lip lifted. Not a smile. Just permission. "I should go," I said. though my feet didn't. Agree, she nodded slowly. You always do. There wasn't bitterness in her voice, just something like memory. I stepped toward the door and reached for the handle, but stopped. Her presence behind me felt like a magnet, not pulling, just reminding me it was there. I turned. She was closer than I expected. Maybe she had moved. Maybe I had. Her gaze met mine. Not intense. Not desperate. Just steady. Like she was seeing something she hadn't let herself see before. Her hand brushed the doorframe, fingers grazing the edge, as if deciding whether to open it wider or close it for good, and then she said it. Next time, don't call me ma'am. I don't know why it struck so deep. Maybe it was the way she said it. Soft, amused but firm. Like she was drawing a line but hoping I'd cross it. I nodded. Couldn't find the right words, so I didn't try. She reached forward, and for a heartbeat I thought she might touch my cheek. But her hand stopped an inch away, fingers curling slowly, almost thoughtfully, before dropping to her side. She stepped back, and then, gently, deliberately, she closed the door. Not fast, not cold. Just enough to let the air between us fold softly into silence. I stood there for a moment, longer than I should have. The porch light hummed above me. My hand still hovered near the doorknob, as if it hadn't accepted the goodbye yet. But the air had shifted. Not with a kiss. Not with a touch. Just with something unspoken. And sometimes, those are the moments that stay longest. It's been 3 weeks since that night. The bag I brought, the one that didn't need delivering, is still in the back seat of my car. I've passed by other houses, other doors, but none of them stayed with me the way hers did. Every Friday, like clockwork, her address reappears on my route sheet. I don't ask why. I don't think she orders anything. But there it is. Black, ink, same time, same line. Some weeks, she answers. Some weeks, she doesn't. When she does, the door opens just enough for her to step into the frame, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in heels, sometimes with her hair tied back like she just stepped out of a memory. We never talk about that night, but it lingers, folded neatly between the things we do say. How's the traffic? You look tired. Still delivering to the bakery downtown? Just ordinary words, but wrapped around them is everything we haven't said, and when she doesn't answer, I still linger. Even if I pretend I'm checking my phone or adjusting something in the van, I glance at the porch light. It's always on, a small thing, a warm thing. I've started noticing how many houses leave their lights off, even when they're home. But hers glows like it's waiting, or remembering. I don't know what we are. I don't know what we could be. But I know that her silence feels different than anyone else's noise. Last Friday, as I walked back to the van, I saw the curtain shift. Just a little. Enough to know she saw me. Enough to know she didn't want me to know she saw me. It made me smile. Not because I needed her to open the door, but because it meant she still cared if I was there. There's no music playing when I deliver now. No playlist loud enough to cover the quiet I carry after seeing her. But, somehow, it doesn't feel empty. It feels like something waiting to be named. And maybe that's what some stories are. Not finished, not defined, just real in their in-betweenness. A porch light, a missed call, a glance through a window. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the way someone closes the door, softly, or the way their porch light keeps burning. Not for you to enter, but for you to remember.